I realize now that my second name is not Spezzatura, it's Sprezzatura.
Oh,
It's an Italian word, I didn't spell it right, but it means having effortless nonchalance and at the same time being totally fake. So that's what I am. I'm totally fake, but I have effortless nonchalance. So I'll begin to talk about a couple of things that bug me before I have my next guest. The first thing that bugs me is the fact that the plays only have one person these days. So you go to the play and you see, well, sometimes there's only one person in the audience, but definitely now it's a problem because people not going to the theaters, right? But there's like one person's on stage, and it's like, I used to like it when the plays had more than one persons and they were talking. Now my friend, and arguing and yelling and saying bad things, like my friend David Roach used to call it four people being rude in a room. That's what he called a play, and that's what I expect from a play. Hopefully at least four people being rude, being very rude in a room. Now I'll tell you about my most favorite movie right now. I was thinking I might do this now and then, is tell you. Now how many of you, I don't think any of you will have said you've seen this. How many of you have seen the movie? The movie I've seen most recent is always my favorite movie. But have you ever seen, it's a very old film, have you ever seen The World of Henry Orient? Yeah! I thought some of you might have seen that movie. Now I'm going to give you some info about it. If you haven't seen it, you must rush. I don't think, Therese, I don't think you have seen it, Therese. It is amazing. So it is, was my favorite film, and I went back to it after so many years. It's a film, it's about two young girls. They're maybe 13 years old. So it's like my favorite movie because I totally understand. I have this case of arrested development, as a lot of the gay men do, that I remember, I feel I am a 13-year-old girl inside somewhere. So this movie I get. And they're obsessed with a piano player named Henry Orient, who is played by, are you ready, Peter Sellers. And he is not just a piano player, he is a concert pianista. And he is in love with, oh my God, I'm going to forget her last name. Remember Richard Benjamin, He and She, the program with Paula? Paula Prentice is his lover. Paula Prentice is as good a comic as fucking Peter Sellers, and they are having all these clandestine love affairs in the bushes, and the little girls are running after them, and they're learning about sex and sexuality, which I'm still not understanding, and they're learning about it in this film. It's such a beautiful film, you must see it. I always see the film about the women's. Another one of the women's films that I see is called Fort Tilden. I bet you never saw that movie. Fort Tilden, you must rush out and see that too. It is about two young women who go out and they're just getting past the age of being teenagers, but they're still running after the teenage boys. And so I could totally identify with that. And they are going, and they're kind of horrible. But it's so funny, and my experience was about Fort Tilden was that when I first realized that some women, this was around 2018, are not understanding the gay men's anymore, which is part of the whole thing that Scott was talking about, because I went to a woman and I said, you know, I really love the Fort Tilden. It's about these two horrible women, and I love it. But of course, it's not a problem that I love a film about horrible women, because I'm a gay man, and I'm drag queen, and I understand. And she looked at me as if I'd just taken a shit on the floor. You know what I mean? So she did not get it. And it was like, don't you understand that I have I'm not a woman, never experienced being a woman, but I do have a little girl inside this gay body, and I understand a lot about that stuff, and that's why I have a different perspective than a straight man who comes and sees the movie about the girls. Anyway, that was a real awakening for me. So I thought I'd end on a note a little bit about heterosexuality, because I want to introduce somebody who's, as far as I know, heterosexual, and his name, would you please welcome, he's going to read us some poems, and then I'm going to interview him mercilessly. He must be terrified. Will you please welcome Paul Edward Costa?
Does anyone else ever consider what exact moves they would use to beat the ever-living hell out of their younger self? Jabs, crosses, hooks, uppercuts, body shots, leg locks, neck cranks, soccer kicks, or hammer fists in some technical knockout from combinations where God's ref has to step in. wave their arms and say, that's it, they've had enough. This new version of you wins. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not really a slam poet, so my stuff tends to be a little bit shorter on that side, so I tend to go for kind of compression in some ways. These are going to be a bit shorter than ones you might hear that might go, 3 or 4 minutes. I agree with the assertion that holding on to hatred is like drinking poison and then waiting for your villains to die. Unless the plan is patiently swishing and gargling, building immunities to lure in enemies using seductive, enigmatic smiles before kissing them without making up. As if uniquely freaky Roman guards had asked Judas to not just kiss, but passionately make out with Jesus in a prelude to also personally driving each 9-inch nail into the crucifix.
Yeah.
Unlike a lot of the ones that I do, this next one is one of my purely, and some of you have heard it before, this one's a purely kind of realistic poem that's just basically about something that happened while traveling. And it was published in the last collection that Clownhouse Arts Collective put up. And if you're interested, check out Clownhouse Arts Collective. They've been doing a lot of publishing and open mic stuff, but they're also getting into a lot more multimedia stuff as well. They had a film festival recently, so yeah, do check out Clownhouse Arts Collective here in Toronto. Florence, Italy, July 2016. I'm traveling with a companion questioning the validity of my degree in history while also asking me, who exactly were the Medici family? And that wasn't even our trip's strangest contradiction. Such a distinction lies in churches, insisting on selling my companion a shawl for covering her sundress exposed shoulders, where it was 30 degrees Celsius outside, so that she'd not offend houses of the Lord with her upper arms so sinfully exposed. She obliged, despite my objections, and we toured holy walls, displaying Baroque paintings, unironically showing bare female breasts and angel baby genitalia adorning the interior. One of my friends is here. Karen recently performed at the Mallow Nights, where they have a poet performing with a dancer who does interpretive dance there. And I was talking to somebody about it after, and I remember thinking, yeah, I don't know if that's really for my poetry, because I don't know what an interpretive dancer would do when I say angel baby genitals. I don't even want to even open that possibility up at all. This one, speaking of films and theatricality, comes from a movie the title comes from a movie called Only the Brave, where Jeff Bridges says to a bunch of trainee firefighters, if you're looking for sympathy, the only place you're going to find it is a dictionary somewhere between shit and syphilis. So this one's called Between Shit and Syphilis. Go ask strangers for sympathy. You've never let them down, can still be the ideal picture of humanity in which they believe, and there's no fermented history, bloating a relationship's mulberry-colored corpse until it bursts. Ask someone who's seen your best, alongside your worst for that understanding, and you'll find how much a human mind really recalls, though selectively focused on a psyche's fault lines, when interactions rooted in love are thought of as never involving any mess. When passive-aggressive reactions are mistaken for forms of peacefulness. Thank you. This next one is called Shining Bitter Smiles. It was published last June in a place called Dark Winter Literary Magazine. And my book coming about a year from now called Vigils of the Night Office will be coming out from Dark Winter Press. So if you have individual pieces to submit or even full manuscripts, check out either Dark Winter Literary Magazine or Dark Winter Press, published by a woman over here in Ontario. You know, I take data from what I'm told, plus what I see. Plug it in, and the equation keeps spitting out incoherent anarchy. I hear how rude it is to tell people they'd look better if they smile, that we should feel our valid feelings, and that forcing a happy disposition is its own oppressive misery. And everyone seems to agree. But I still see the biggest indicator of success in sizable social circles being how constantly you can portray a toy's icy layers of permanent joy. I must have missed the part in Winnie the Pooh where Eeyore eats the right apple, learns shame for his temperament, and then finally attains a state of worth. Perhaps I never unheard a past partner casually proclaim justification for my exclusion at work by saying how lately I had been really depressed. And maybe Batman will appear an even darker, more malevolent creature of the night if the Joker successfully fills our atmosphere with low enough levels of his laughing gas that everything gets a bit more pleasant, though not strange enough to actually stop and listen when someone says, "Wait, something is different." Thank you. The last three here. As a child in the 90s, being traumatized by the X-Files was a rite of passage. For me, it happened seeing alien oil seep into bodies and the orifices subsequently sewn shut for safety. Inverting that idea, I figure we can stop ghosts from emerging through us as their unknowing conduits by creating complete cocoons around our heads using whole rolls of electrical tape. Not so much for plugging passages spirits use literally, it's more for making ourselves the vessels they control immobile and unable to obey ethereal orders from voices embedded within us, where the most skilled hide so well we don't think they're there at all, even as they pull our facial muscles, making us speak like the world's most believably realistic marionette dolls. Thank you. And the second last one here is, since I know a couple of the questions deal with my kind of dual identity as a teacher and as a poet, this one is a poem that deals with my experience of teaching. If you love something, never view its portrayal in a fictional film. For 10 years, I've taught students at every level of high school, and yet could never stand movies though teachers deemed inspirational. Spare me references to Stand and Deliver, Dangerous Minds, or Freedom Writers. There are a minority of educators naturally possessing that energy. The rest do their best nurturing pupils past their own skill level. The worst embody irony by first seeing themselves in their mind's eye, while trying to act like heroes on film reels depicting ideal teachers, doing more posing than teaching, not speaking to classes as much as an invisible camera they imagine in the back wall, thinking they'll make months of daily instructions resemble edited, tightly condensed, 2-hour fictional montages of cinematically enhanced lessons. Thank you. And this last one is a cover. This is the newest one I've done. So if you watch the show The Sopranos, you know that the opening theme song is a song called Woke Up This Morning by a British band called Alabama 3 or A3, sometimes denoted. And if you listen to the full version, not the one that plays in the show, the full version, the album version, has a spoken word intro that happens at the beginning of it with just some very light music in the background. So I don't have music, but this is that spoken word introduction. And after 3 days of drinking with Larry Love, I just get an inkling to go on home. So I'm walking down Cold Harbor Lane, head hung low. 3 or 4 in the morning, the sun's coming up and the birds are out singing. I let myself into my pad, wind up that spiral staircase, and stretch out nice on the Chesterfield. Pithecanthropus erectus is already on the CD player, and I just press that remote button to sublimity and listen to the sweet, sculptural rhythms of Charles Mingus and J.R. Monterose and Jackie McLean duet on those saxophones, and the sound makes its way out the window, mixing with the traffic noises outside, and all of a sudden, I'm overcome by a feeling of brief mortality. Because I'm getting on in the world, coming up on 35 years, 35 stony gray steps towards the grave. You know, the box awaits its grisly load. And then I'm gonna be food for worms. And just like Charles Mingus wrote that beautiful piece of music epitaph for Eric Dolphy, I say, so long, Eric. So long, John Coltrane and Charles Mingus. So long, Duke Ellington and Lester Young. So long, Billie Holiday and Ella Fitzgerald. So long, Jimmy Reed. So long, Muddy Waters. And so long, Howlin' Wolf. Thank you so kindly. Okay, I do have 2 guest readers who will be reading after the interview later on, Jennifer Venner and Eugene Stiles. They're here, but yeah, we'll do the interview now. Thank you so much. Oh, here we go. Move around there, other side.
Thank you, Paul Edward Costa. So I don't know where to start with you either, because there's so much there. I mean, the first thing I want to say is that I think that was I've seen many of Paul's performances here at the Imp. And I think that was the most amazing one I've ever heard. Like, I just loved it. I'm a little bit drunk, but I just loved it. It's like I still sort of somewhere spizzy, even though I'm maybe more spizzy when I'm gone. And it was beautiful. And the interesting thing about not only of you, I always knew you were a wonderful performer, but there's this thing about you started out and you had various ones, especially at the beginning, but then the one at the end, which are very approachable poems with an actual logic and reality. And then you have someone you go off into the surrealist sort of thing. And so how conscious are you of that?
I think I'm very much like, in terms of how I approach poetry, there's really two kind of schools, and if you ever read like the Norton Anthology of English Literature, especially the second half, it kind of talks about how after World War II, poetry kind of split into two streams. One was what we call like the academic or the page poetry, which has very little author voice, much more fragmented, non-linear, more constructed, more ironic, less direct emotion, and that's sort of like your
Eliot.
Yeah, your descendants of Eliot. And then the other side is like the descendants of William Carlos Williams and Walt Whitman.
And became the beat poets.
Yeah, exactly. So the beat poets definitely like Ginsberg's the other side of that. So like the New York school, the beat poets, and the Black Mountain school, like Charles Olson. So I've been more into that second camp. I like to have a connection with natural language and a connection to some kind of cause and effect, narration. So I am conscious of it, but I do like to still not be purely realistic. So I like, I like surrealism, but in a manageable context, I guess.
Now you talked a little bit. You mentioned the teacher thing, and I'm fascinated because you are a teacher, and your teacher. What are they? 10, 11, 12, maybe?
9, 10, 11, 12. But right now...
9, 10, the troublesome years.
Yep.
The difficult times. No, I taught at... Scott. No, I did. I can say I taught at the university. Can you believe that? Spizzy taught at the university. And I love the teaching. Now tell me, and I'm very sad that I don't do teaching. Believe it or not, the Spizzy is like a substitute for the teaching for me. So what do you... Because I obviously thought the teaching was a bit of a performance, which I would say that you must realize to some degree, because I used to say that there are some teachers, especially at the university level, who are they are walking encyclopedias, right? You know this, Therese, probably. People who are they're so full of knowledge, these professors at the university, but they're dead boring. But it's like you're reading a living book. They talk to you, right? And then there's the other professors who are actually completely engaging, completely. So where do you put yourself? And just tell me a little bit about the teaching, and because it sounds like you love it.
Yeah, no, I think what's really important is the fact that my high school that I went to in the Peel District School Board is probably the last one to kind of technologically upgrade. So when I teach at schools now, we have like this an LCD projector in the ceiling, and there's a computer on the teacher desk and a class website.
Do they allow the cell phone?
Oh, yeah, well, that's a different question entirely.
Okay, do this first.
But what's interesting, when I went to high school, there was none of that. If a teacher wanted to show a movie, they had to rent the cart and wheel the cart down with a big belt over it. And if you want to do a presentation, you have to put on, acetate, clear things and things like that. But at that time, the teacher had to be a lot more of like a performance artist. It was like a one-man show because you had the textbook, maybe the TV, maybe an overhead projector, and then it was just my grade 11 and 12 history teacher, guy who's retired now, called Greg Hobbs. He was like that to an extent. So I still have that now. And I'm glad I came up and...
But you have that in you.
Yeah, so when I teach now, it's much... I can do it much more off the cuff. If the computer isn't working, I can just take chalk and still be okay. But if you grew up depending on that, then you're a bit more screwed, because then if the board intranet goes down, and it's like, and the computers don't even turn on, and we have no idea what we're doing now.
No, I understand completely, and to me it's very much a part that I must tell you an anecdote. I must just my monologue briefly, and that is like when I was in grade 5, I had a teacher, I never forget it. His name was Mr. Draggett, believe it or not, Draggett, and he was very sexy. We did not have the grade 5 male teacher, and for me this was like, woo! I did not know. It was just in the back of my brain, all this homosexual stuff. But anyway, Mr. Draggett. And he comes in one day, he closes the doors of the room, and the windows or whatever, he makes it all private. And then he takes off his jacket, which for me was very, very exciting. And he has these arms, that he rolls up his sleeves, loosens his tie, and then He takes out a pack of cigarettes, and he has a smoke, and then he says, never do this.
Yeah, my mother mentioned that when she went to university, the professors were still allowed to smoke in the 70s.
Wow.
And she had a professor who would be writing on the board, but he'd move his way from left to right, but his pack of cigarettes would make his way slowly with him along the ridge with the chalk. Chalk, cigarettes, blackboard, all you need.
Well, it also makes me think of the fact that one of my teachers at the university, believe it or not, and Spizzy lie, but he tells the truth. So my teacher at the university was, are you ready? Irving Layton was my teacher. Oh, yes! In my class, Mr. Irving Layton, he met his future wife, Harriet.
Which one?
But no, the Harriet, who he dumped that nice lady. Like, he just dumped this woman, ruined her life. Harriet was in my class. Anyway, it's a very long story, but she was writing poems to Irving, and I didn't even know it. Like, she wrote a poem called the Fire in Me Matches the Fire in You. And I remember she read this poem, and my friend Sally Clark, she was like, after class, she was like, you know what's going on? Anyway, she was like trying to get him in bed, and I was just like this weird little homo kid, and I didn't get it. And she said, no. He was trying, and sure enough, anyway, that's a truth. But he started off the class, this is the bad in the plot, saying, and there were probably half of the class was the women's and half of the class was the boys. And he said, women cannot be writers. Oh, that's how he started the class. This is I'm very, very old. This was 1973, I think, or 4. So he says that, and all these women, many of whom I know now still, are famous or successful poets were in that class. They tussled with him, of course. They took him to task. They said, fuck you, you asshole, but they wouldn't say those words. But I thought that was very interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned Irving Layton, because I mentioned this last, in November when I was here, that my grandfather knew Irving Layton. Wow. And so that was kind of part of me. My introduction, I remember in grade 9, I started writing poetry just because I was in a band and I wrote lyrics. So I started writing lyrics. But I found a Irving Layton book in my basement and asked my mom, who the heck is this? What is this? Who is this person? She mentioned that your grandfather knew him. So half my family, mom came from Montreal. They used to see like Leonard Cohen walking around in the family and things like that. And I think my great aunt had met like William Shatner back in Montreal. But they'd say that Irving and my grandfather would get together and with other people at various coffee shops, and they used to always tell me that like, oh, my grandpa has some of his books, and after he passed, and I found them behind his bookshelf. There was like different stacks. So I got a bunch of Irving Layton books. Some of them are signed from like 1955 in like Contact Press in Montreal and things like that. So, yeah, it's really cool.
Do you ever? You probably don't. Do you ever perform for your students as a poet? Sometimes
to demonstrate things, but not usually my own poetry. I'll usually do other poetry like covers that I have and things like that. But sometimes I have, particularly if I'm trying to demonstrate something like a technique or a
And do you think that you can? And it's still because here we go. I wanted to talk to you about the youth.
Yep, sure.
The youth are the
Absolutely.
problem for me, and I feel I'm so old. So I look at the youth and go, oh my God, throw them in the trash can. But I know that's bad, and you are there. You are teaching them, and they are young, and they are dealing with a horrible, horrible world. So I get it. But what do you think we can do? Like, are you able to? I'm almost done. Are they literate? Do they want to be literate? Do they want to read books? That's my question. Can you make them, or do you want them to, or what?
There are many that read books. The way that they read is much more multifaceted now, as opposed to just novels and things like that. The things online, web comics, nonfiction articles, podcasts, things like that. Like we use technology that we have now, and now I often think that like if you had this level of technological openness, because for many, many years the best and cheapest way to get a message out was to print it on paper, ship the paper, people read the paper, that's how it goes. Yeah. You couldn't get on TV or radio unless you had the means, really. Yeah. But now we have that, and I wonder if all the writers of the past would have still been writers if they had those other elements. Like, would Hemingway have just had a YouTube channel? I don't know. Could you imagine Ezra Pound with a Twitter? Holy shit. But I wonder if you gave them other options, or if you had a better ability to broadcast spoken word, would more have gone into spoken rather than written in that way. But speaking to the youth, though. They're getting nicer and more sensitive than we were, and I mean that in a good way. So for example, one time a girl last year when I was teaching, out of nowhere, very loud, very outspoken, no filter, just looked at me out of nowhere and said, hey sir, kind of looks like you could be like, descended from like a mystical race of elves. with my big ears. And I remember, but as soon as she said that, the rest of the class, I didn't mean if that's going to break me, I shouldn't be teaching. But the rest of the class, that was the moving part. They all like immediately were like, "What the hell? You can't say that." And I was like, they were very concerned that, like, for my, well-being from that. But what's funny is
super hot ears.
Thank you. No, for sure. I don't know. It doesn't bother me. It's all good. But
sexy men have big ears.
Yeah.
Clark Gable. Do you know Clark Gable? Some of you remember him. He had these ears like this.
Yes, guys.
Barack Obama, very sexy men. They have the big ears. Go ahead.
No, for sure. But what's interesting is the way that they've been, especially the ones I have that are in grade 9 now, which kind of went through elementary and middle school and like the pandemic, or also in more recent social developments, but they're much more conscious of certain things. So when I taught, one time I was teaching grade 12 college, and I taught Streetcar Named Desire. And we got to the
My
point,
favorite play, basically,
it's
the whole road.
It's a wonderful one.
Mm-hmm.
But when the meter taker boy, who's about 16, comes in...
Oh, he's actually selling the newspaper.
Thank you, pardon me.
But that's okay.
But Blanche kind of moves in on him and like kisses him, clearly without consent.
Yes.
And I was worried, especially because it was a college class, a lot of boys, I was worried that they'd be like, yeah! But what I was worried about, but I didn't need to be worried, because as soon as that happened, they were all like outraged. They were like, what? No, that's not cool. What the is that? And I was like, yes, I'm warned that they have that reaction. But they also have been raised with a lot of terms and conscious sensitivity that is new for like us now, but they've been steeped in it. So they have, especially the younger ones, have a bit more of an irreverent, or they've grown up with terms that are new for us. So for example, normally I see 2 kids roughhousing, and one kid's like play fighting, one kid's pretend punching the other, and I say, all right kids, stop the roughhousing, stop punching him, like it's not right. And then the kid who's being punched will look over and be like, oh no, it's okay sir, I give consent. And I'm like,
that's a good thing to know.
God almighty. And then I'll be like, kid will be like, hey, like, the kid next to them and be like, hey, you took my book. Oh no, I didn't take your book. And then the kid goes, sir, he's gaslighting me. And I'm like,
what?
Gaslighting me.
Oh wow.
So I was like, so they've really grown up with a vocabulary that we haven't, but that also makes it strange because as I get older, I'm having a harder time understanding them. They keep trying to explain slang to me, and I'm like, oh, so is that a noun? Oh, you use it as a noun and an adjective. Okay, can you use it in a sentence for me in some ways?
That would happen to me all the time when I was at the university. The kids would say things, and I would go, "What the heck are you talking?" And often they'd be. That what was interesting about the media was that they would all be referring to one TV show that they were on their computers, because now they watch it, but still TV show. They're all watching the same show, and they're all talking about the same character, and they're using some terminology from that show. Right?
And I do not know, and I do not know enough anime and K-pop to keep up with my students, because they are all in anime and K-pop, and I can talk to them about Dragon Ball Z, which I remember from a kid watching YTV here in Canada, but that's about it.
So you think that they are going to be literate in another way?
Well, when you mentioned that, last Friday, I called in sick, and I mentioned on my class website, I put a little post saying that, hey guys, I'm away today, supply teacher will be in. Mm-hmm. And they were like, and then one kid just got creative and just wrote up an entire medical diagnosis for me. And then so the kid's like, I'm sorry everyone else, Mr. Costa's not going to make it. And then they were writing like fake tributes and obituaries. And
That's great.
Then one of the kids was like, oh sir, are you training for your next fight in the UFC? Because there's a guy named Paulo Costa in the UFC. So they're amused by that fact. But then I'm looking at all this, I'm being like, you guys have put more thought, creativity, effort in writing into this than any assignment I have given you. So they definitely have the ability. Whether they're motivated or not depends, but they have that ability, and yeah. So I do think that they'll be literate. Maybe not in the same ways we consider. But
well, unfortunately, I have to wind this down. But I didn't. I thought I would leave the objectification of Paul Edward Costa to the end. But doesn't he have very sexy arms?
Oh, sir.